What's happening, guys? Pete back with you for an all-new edition of the Music Box Pete podcast. Hope you guys are doing well. On today's episode, we're going to continue talking about the alternative airplay chart, aka the Modern Rock Tracks chart. And on today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Mount Rushmore of artists throughout the entire history of the chart. And we've talked about it to some extent. This one is a little bit more personal, just ones that I feel are the greatest, not just based on the current statistics and all that too, although that does have, some meaning here. But I think just in my personal opinion, so the top 4 Mount Rushmore of artists ever in the history of the Modern Rock Tracks chart, dating back to '88. So this one I had to think a good deal about, because there were some artists I put on, there was one that I took off, there were some that remained constant, and I just kept fiddling with it, and ultimately I chose ones that I felt just best represent the entire history of the chart, and just, artists that became big, like, literally from the start, some that took a little bit later to really come into their own. I just think with this chart, and just, with this list of the Mount Rushmore artists I'm going to give you very shortly, really shows you the depth of the talent that was present in the chart right from the very beginning, because it went through so many turns and phases with the grunge era, then the early 2000s garage rock movement, like the Strokes and all those bands. I think with this, it really represents the great of alternative, aka modern rock. So I just think, why don't we just start things off right away. So the first Mount Rushmore of artists, and this one is undisputable. There's no question that they had to go on. There's no debate. Red Hot Chili Peppers. They have the lead with the most #1 songs in the history of the Modern Rock Tracks chart with 15. They've literally just completely defined the landscape, literally from the beginning. They've had at least one #1 at least 3 decades, going back all the way back to the 1990s, which is impressive in itself. They are second on the list of artists with the most cumulative weeks at #1, with 91 cumulative weeks spanning across all their hits. Foo Fighters have the most with 95, by the way. They have the second most top 10 songs with 28. They're tied with Green Day for the second most top 10s. Foo Fighters have the most top 10s with 34. They are ranked 5th with the artists with most chart entries with 37 chart entries. Foo Fighters and U2 are tied for the most with 44 each, but pretty undisputable. I think Scar Tissue was probably the best song out of them, no question. And that ruled on top for 16 weeks, and that was a record that stood for, I think, 5 years. It tied with Stain's It's Been a While and Green Day's Boulevard of Broken Dreams. Red Hot Chili Peppers had that record all by itself for 2 years. Stained It's Been a While tied it. Then Green Day's Boulevard of Broken Dreams came on, that tied it. Then much later, Panic at the Disco's High Hopes tied it. But I think in the history of the chart, it should have ranked higher when they did the all-time alternative songs list. I think Scar Tissue only came in at number 14 or something, or it might have been much lower. It should have ranked at least top 10. That's my general opinion. But Chili Peppers are just the undisputed, and of course, Californication, great album. There's no other band that best represents alternative better than Chili Peppers, so they're an undisputed, never coming off the Mount Rushmore on my list. So Chili Peppers are on. The next band I'm going to put on to is Incubus. And Incubus, I just have so much respect for. Going back to early 2000 when they first came along with Make Yourself. When Incubus first debuted on the chart, there was just something about them that I really took to almost immediately. And of course, Drive was their first big hit, which was the #1 alternative song of 2001. Really from there, of course, their next album, Morning View, really just set them off too. You could make the case. You can make the case to Make Yourself was really the breakout album, and of course, with Drive, Stellar, Pardon Me, all those songs. Privilege is an incredibly underrated track that was on that album. But I think Morning View was my personal favorite album. But throughout the history of the alternative chart, Incubus have been the one constant. They've constantly churned out hit after hit after hit. Throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s as well too. And I just think that they're just one of those bands that are just, they've never deviated from who they are as musicians. I had the chance to see them in concert about 2 years ago at the Garden. Coheed and Cambria opened for them, but Incubus headlined. They were sort of doing it was an anniversary tribute for a Morning View, which is the 22nd anniversary. It was sort of an odd number anniversary tour year. But they did such an amazing job with it too, and they just get better year after year. Brandon Boyd, his vocals still sound superb. But if you look at the Mount Rushmore of the Modern Rock Tracks chart, Incubus fully deserve to be on there, just for what they've done and just all the chart success they've had. So Incubus is on the Mount Rushmore. Next band I want to put up is the Killers. Now they came on mid 2000s when Hot Fuss came out. That completely changed the landscape. I think it changed the DNA of the whole modern rock tracks chart for good, because I think when Brandon Flowers and company came out, it completely altered the game, in my opinion. Just when somebody told me, I think was the first single that was released from there. Then Mr. Brightside came after that, if I remember the order correctly. I had 5 songs. I remember I used to have my own personal chart when iTunes first came out, and so I had my own personal top 10 ranking. I think it was a top 20 ranking or top 25. I think it started out like a top 20 ranking, then I went to top 25. But the Killers were constantly on there. On my chart, the Killers had 14 consecutive top 10 hits on my personal chart. I remember the statistics of this like yesterday. Only one of the songs went to number 1. I think that was When You Were Young, which ruled for 5 weeks. And this is just on my personal chart. But the Killers just have constantly, if you look in the Modern Rock Tracks chart, the Killers have constantly been there, churning out hits after hits after hits. And just like the many number 1s that they had. And of course, The Man was their most recent chart topper back in 2017, but on the alternative airplay chart, they've had, over their history, they've had 3 number 1 hits, 21 total songs charted, 14 top 10 hits, which is the same on my personal chart, coincidentally and oddly enough. But just, and the 3 number 1s were When You Were Young, Caution, and Boy. And The Man actually peaked at number 2, by the way. For some reason, I thought it charted at number 1, but just the full chart history they've had is just impressive in and of itself. And just, of course, when Mr. Brightside, every time you hear it at a college football game and just every sporting event now, just become this universal anthem right now. And just the Killers have just, fully deserved everything they had coming to them. And I'm glad that I'm just so happy to see all the success finally just become one of those universally loved artists. So the Killers on the list. And the final Mount Rushmore of artists I want to highlight real quick is Linkin Park. And looking back on Linkin Park's chart success, too, and 14 number 1 hits, tied with 21 Pilots for the second most in the history of the chart, 34 charted songs, 22 top 10 hits. Of course, the biggest one was In the End, just my personal favorite, I think everybody's favorite. They've also had Lost, Reach the Top, Faint, Waiting for the End, What I've Done, Numb, Breaking the Habit, New Divide, Line from You, Somewhere I Belong, Burn It Down, The Emptiness Machine, Up from the Bottom, and The Catalyst. Just, for them to still be getting number 1s, especially in the 2020s, even, with the new front person they have for the band, Emily Armstrong, and just, which that's a whole other thing. I think Linkin Park should have ceased to operate after Chester died. It doesn't make sense, but seeing as they're still able to get number 1s, just speaks to mind just, how high in demand they are, too. And just, in the entire history of the chart, looking at all the success they've had and just still... And what I think it also is, and I've noticed this with some other bands, too, like My Chemical Romance, is that they're still getting a new following. Because I remember, this is like 2 or 3 years ago, I started, school kid walking to school with the My Chemical Romance t-shirt. Seeing how bands like them are still getting noticed today, even when they weren't even born yet, when some of their music originally came out, and for them to still be gaining a following today is just, it's absolutely amazing to say the least. I think Linkin Park are one of those bands that just, it makes me happy to see that an entirely new generation is coming to appreciate their music, and it really just speaks to mind, just, passing down one another. It's sort of almost like a full circle moment, to say the least. But I'm sure a lot of people have opinions about, who their Mount Rushmore of artists are. And there was a lot that I considered that eventually took off. Foo Fighters I heavily considered, but I think that just would have been a safe pick, because, Foo Fighters just led the... all the metrics in terms of the amount of number 1s they've had, tied for the lead with top 10 hits. It would have been a safe pick to put them up. So I heavily considered them. Heavily considered Green Day. Again, that would have been another safe pick. Blink-182, you can make the case for that. A lot of bands I consider. U2, I think, would have been another safe pick. Weezer. I mean, more of the 90s stuff. I'm not a fan of Weezer's later stuff at all. But it's interesting to see what's happening on the chart with some of the newer artists, like 21 Pilots, for example, starting to get up there in terms of all the metrics. Because, I think 21 Pilots could tie Chili Peppers for the most number 1 songs. I think they're getting up at most cumulative weeks, the 4th in there as well, too. Of course, the most top 10 songs are tied with Pearl Jam and Weezer with 21 each. So we'll see what happens. I think just the metrics are constantly shifting, too. And it's just amazing to see, like, the entire history chart, just, keeping this chart alive, even as it's known as the alternative airplay chart, just keeping the history and the legacy of the modern rock tracks chart alive, just, going back in time and seeing all these great songs that are out there. And also, one thing I'll be working on, which I don't know if it's going to be impossible, I won't be able to do like Apple Music playlists, like every single weekly chart. But I did do one of like every single yearly chart, like the year-end charts, which are available in the Billboard section of my playlist thing. So if you're an Apple Music listener, you can go there and listen to all the ones. I have the ones from 88, I think, all the way through 2025. So I was able to accumulate that list through various sources, and it was an absolute labor of love for me to, especially printing out all the weekly charts that I did around this time last year. I think around this time last year was when I officially finished it. So it was a labor of love for me, and just bring my love for the modern rock tracks chart to life. So I hope you enjoyed this Mount Rushmore of artists, and in the coming weeks, I'll be able to do like more specially themed shows with more regular. This time, we're going to do like once a month. So that's sort of the regular schedule, because I've been off over the last 4 weeks or like 6 weeks. Just trying to gather things together. Just been busy with work and all that. But to get these, I'll be posting with more regularity, at least once a month. So thanks once again for tuning in to the Music Box P podcast. See you soon.